Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning and welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Rudabeh Shahbazi. Jim DeFede is off this week. The September 11th terrorist attacks reshaped life as we knew it and marked a defining turning point in U.S. intelligence operations. To help prevent another 9/11-like incident, the Department of Homeland Security was created and the CIA evolved into a war-fighting intel service. I recently sat down with Philip Mudd, the former deputy director of the CIA's Counterterrorist Center. His new book reflects one of the CIA's most controversial and haunting post-9/11 chapters, the use of so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. And we do want to warn you, parts of this conversation are sensitive and may be uncomfortable to hear. Thank you for your more than 2 decades of service to this country. And thank you for coming in today. This is kind of your opportunity to tell your own story and to tell the story of your friends in the intelligence community and what the climate was like right after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which America had never seen the likes of before. And you were in fear that there could be another imminent attack at any time.
I was at the White House Executive Office Building. That's the office building for White House national security staff on 9/11. We were evacuated. I remember somebody walking down the hall saying, "We got to get out. We got to get out," because we thought the next plane was meant for us. That was the Shanksville, Pennsylvania plane. You know, I went back to the CIA a few months later, and the feeling was, for years, the feeling was overwhelming. Every day, the director then, the CIA director, was a guy named George Tenet, who's become a friend since then. But George Tenet would look at us and say, look, if there's another 9/11 tomorrow, what we used to call the second wave of 9/11 attacks, if there's another 9/11 tomorrow, and you look back and say, I should have done X, Y, Z, why don't you do it today? Because it's going to happen again. We all assumed there would be another 9/11. So the intensity of pressure lasted for years. And the last thing I would say is the thought that we were losing, for me, at the CIA, going into about 2004, 2005, I thought we were losing for 2 or 3 or 4 years. I thought Al-Qaeda was winning. The intensity of pressure was high.
It's a pressure that most people can't imagine.
Yeah, I think so.
So you proceed to reorient the CIA, you reorient the intelligence community, you shift your strategy, you set up these black sites, which are secret sites around the world where you take suspected terrorists and subject them to enhanced interrogation techniques that would not be allowed in America.
Correct. To understand the CIA, you have to step back. It's an agile organization. We're not the military. We're not the FBI. We don't operate under U.S. laws. We do whatever the president says, and we do it quickly. So if you go back and step back in 2002 with that idea, whatever the president says, we're going to do it. Add another element. In the spring of 2002, the CIA, and I remember the night he was captured. I remember the night. The spring of 2002, the CIA captured its first high-value, sort of senior Al-Qaeda terrorist. He talked. He was injured during his capture. He was almost killed. The CIA actually flew out physicians to help him survive. But after a while, he said, you CIA guys, go home, have babies. I'm not going to talk again. The CIA guys I knew, the guys, my friends I interviewed for the book, most of the men, said, what are we going to do? If he has information that might stop the next attack, and if he decides to stop talking, do we send him to the United States where he gets a lawyer and the lawyer says, shut up? Or do we put him in our own facilities and subject him to aggressive interrogation techniques? Back in 2000, I think the answer would be different today in 2019, but back in 2002, people said, we're going to create our own facilities and we're going to push them around. That's what we're going to do.
Push them around.
Yep.
But what happened in those sites is tantamount to torture in a lot of people's views. I know that it was constructed, these techniques were constructed to push up right up to the edge of the law, but many people would consider this torture, including our own Senate, according to the 2014 intelligence report from the Senate.
That's right, and the Senate attacked people, including me. I would go back to 2002. I briefed the Senate. My friends briefed the Senate. We told them what we were doing. I think the message I would have to the American people is, look, in 2002, America was in a different place. The Senate said to me, and the President of the United States said to us, look, do what you have to do to make sure this doesn't happen again. So the CIA went to the Department of Justice and said, we have Al-Qaeda prisoners. what can we do to them within the law? And the Department of Justice gave us written authorization to conduct interrogations that were very aggressive, very aggressive. 17 years later, I think the American people have not witnessed an attack like 9/11, and they said that the stuff you did back then was inappropriate. I accept that. I think that's okay.
But we're talking about simulated drowning, anal rehydration, putting people in stress positions, sexual humiliation.
No.
Stripping people naked and having them hanging by the ceiling.
Some of what I mean, I don't want to do chapter and verse. Some of what you say is what we did. Some has been reported in the media. The question we had was pretty straightforward.
But I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but what did I say that was
For example,
incorrect?
Rectal rehydration. In other words, if someone refuses to take water and food, what do you do?
Well, but according to that Senate report, that was conducted even after it was determined that people didn't need that type of treatment.
That was not the position of the individuals at the CIA. I would readily admit that waterboarding was a CIA interrogation technique. Sleep deprivation, that is depriving someone from sleep, putting someone in a confined position, that is in a box. I understand people will judge
60
me.
hours in a
I get hate mail
box.
all the time, but all I'm saying is rectal rehydration was not a technique that was used as an interrogation technique. It was used as a medical technique. You can say you don't like it. I don't think we should debate this. It's a technical issue. I understand people don't like what we did. When you look at what happened in 2002, when the first prisoner came in, I think the question was, do we look at techniques we use on American military officers to subject them to techniques to prepare them for interrogation overseas? Do we take those techniques and apply them potentially to al-Qaeda prisoners? Back then in 2002, in the spring and summer of 2002, people said yes. And then the second question, which people forget, was, does the Department of Justice say this is legal? And the Department of Justice told us, according to the law, federal law, the U.S. Constitution, you can do this. So my colleagues said, okay.
What about the Geneva Convention? What about Article 3 of the Geneva Convention? I
think the people who worked at the CIA said these are not prisoners of war. They are terrorists who don't wear a uniform. They don't conform to the laws of war. Therefore, again, like it or not, this is the judgment that people made. Therefore, they don't fall under the Geneva Convention. I think people can debate whether that's appropriate. I think that's a fair debate in America. But in 2002, people said no, they don't fall under the Geneva Convention.
So there are Americans being held around the world by adversarial groups, countries. Would it be okay for those entities to subject Americans to the same type of treatment?
No, I don't think so. First of all, if you if you capture an American military officer, that's an individual in uniform who falls under the laws of war.
The term enemy combatant was coined during this era. I mean, that was something that was conceived in order to classify this group of detainees, not as civilians and not as military, right?
I think that's right. I think the real question, and this has partly been answered, is to go to the American Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives and say, look, in 2002, you said what we did at the CIA was okay. If you think this is inappropriate, and I think that's perfectly fine if you're an American legislator, if you think this is inappropriate, then tell us you can't do it again. However, and this is really where people like me get irritated, do not revisit 2002 and pretend like in 2002 your story was different. I spoke to the Senate and the Congress in 2003, 2000 about what we did, and they said, okay. So moving forward, I think it's perfectly fine to say, I don't like what the CIA did. I think that's legitimate. But to pretend like that's what America was when I spoke to the Congress 16 years ago, that's a lie. Didn't happen. They told me it's okay.
More of my conversation with Phil Mudd when we return.